What happens when an HOA Karen decides the entire bay belongs to her community? I stopped by the bay on an ordinary morning and watched my boat disappear, driven by the HOA president like she was hosting a party. I didn't know that moment would pull in the Coast Guard, the whole neighborhood, and the truth itself. What would you do if your HOA thought they owned the water you live on? The morning my boat disappeared started out harmless enough. Clear sky over the Gulf, sun already sharp even though it wasn't 9 yet. Just enough breeze to wrinkle the flat blue water outside the harbor. I had a long day ahead at the Coast Guard station. Briefings, reports, training, and I only swung by Sunset Bay Marina to drop a spare impeller in my dock box and make sure last night's rain hadn't set off Blue Ember's bilge pump too long. 10 minutes, I told myself. Coffee, quick walk down the pier, a look at my lines, then back on the road. From the moment my tires left the highway and hit the cracked Marina road, my gut started buzzing. Most mornings down there are quiet. A couple of trucks at the ramp, somebody rinsing off a deck, the soft clank of rigging. That easy background noise is part of why I bought into this place. Part owner on the old waterline lease, slip rights that weren't subject to every whim in the HOA newsletter. That's what I expected. Instead, halfway down the hill, I heard bass, not the low murmur of somebody's radio. This was chest-thumping, club-level bass that did not belong in a sleepy marina at 8:30 on a Tuesday. It rolled up the road toward me, wrapped in sharp, overlapping peals of laughter. When the last scrub palms dropped away and the marina opened up in front of me, for a heartbeat, I wondered if I'd turned into the wrong place. The main pier was packed. People weren't working. They were watching. A knot of bodies crowded the far end, all facing the mouth of the marina. Phones were up. I pulled into my usual spot under the crooked palm and killed the engine. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening through the open window. Under the music, I heard an engine pushed harder than it liked. I know that sound. I've spent enough hours on patrol boats and enough weekends under Blue Ember's engine hatch to know the difference between a clean climb and somebody jamming the throttle. Whoever was at that helm was running the RPMs up in ragged bursts that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. No, I thought. Can't be. I got out of the truck, heat hitting me full in the face. The air smelled like fuel and hot wood. I headed for the pier, walking faster without really deciding to. "Morning, Commander," somebody said as I passed. I nodded once and kept moving. I stepped out onto the main pier, followed the line of staring faces, and saw her. Blue Ember. She was charging across the mouth of the marina, nose a little too high, throwing more wake than she should have inside the basin. The white hull I'd buffed myself was now slashed with shadows from shiny party streamers taped to the rail. My teak deck, hours of sanding and oiling, was dotted with red plastic cups. At the helm, one hand on my wheel and the other thrust in the air like she was on stage, stood Bethany Reed. Bright floral blouse, pink cardigan, even in this heat. Wide-brimmed sun hat, mouth open in a poll, grin you could see from 200 yards away. President of the Sunset Marina Estates Homeowners Association, and the woman who'd told me 3 weeks earlier that boats should be considered a shared amenity, not an individual luxury. Behind her, 3 other women danced on the aft deck, drinks slopping over the rims of their glasses as Blue Ember slammed through another wake. One of them nearly lost her footing, grabbed the rail, screamed, then laughed even harder. "Girls' day out, baby," Bethany shouted, voice carrying right over the speakers. "This is how we do HOA perks." The crowd on the pier shifted. Someone muttered a curse. A woman in a visor asked under her breath, "Is that allowed?" Blue Ember swung past the end of the pier, stern sliding wide. As she did, the morning sun flashed across the chrome letters on the transom. Blue Ember. No mistaking her. Not for me. Beside me, somebody let out a low whistle. I glanced down and saw Jake Mercer, my neighbor and the marina's unofficial boat whisperer, leaning against a piling with a sweating cup of iced coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. The phone's camera was pointed squarely at my boat. "Tell me that's a club boat I don't know about," Jake said. "That's my boat," I replied. He blinked, turned, really looked at me. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." His expression shifted from amused to grim. "You loan it to her?" "No." He stared back out at the bay. "Did she—" "Keys are supposed to be locked in my dock box," I said. "Unless somebody on the board decided HOA bylaws come with master keys." Jake swore softly. We watched as Bethany yanked the wheel again. Blue Ember lurched, her wake slamming into a moored skiff hard enough to rock it against its fenders. The skiff's owner threw his hands up. One of the women on my deck pointed at him and laughed. A muscle jumped in my cheek. I've spent most of my adult life watching what happens when people treat water like a stage and other people's property like props. I've seen how fast a bad decision at a helm can turn into a body recovery. Because of that, I don't do impulsive, and I don't do yelling unless I have to. But as I watched Bethany swing my boat around like it was a carnival ride, something cold and sharp slid into place behind my ribs. "This isn't a neighbor borrowing a lawnmower," I said quietly. "No," Jake agreed. "That's a stolen vessel with a rookie at the wheel." Out beyond Blue Ember, a neat line of white buoys bobbed in the sun, marking the no-wake zone that leads into the main channel. Past that line, the water stops being our neighborhood bay and becomes a busy stretch of federal navigable waterway. Bethany didn't look toward the buoys once. She was too busy posing for phones. My duty phone weighed heavy on my belt. A few of the marina regulars know what I do besides polish chrome. They know the badge in my wallet isn't decorative. I could feel their eyes on me now as surely as we were all watching the boat. "Remy," Jake said, still staring at the water. "What are you going to do?" Blue Ember hit another wake at a bad angle and slammed down hard enough that I heard the hull's protest from the pier. The women squealed. Bethany threw her head back and laughed like it was all part of the show. Bethany had no idea how close she was to crossing a line she couldn't talk her way back over. I let out a slow breath and reached for my phone. "Who?" I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. "In their right mind steals a Coast Guard commander's boat?" My thumb hovered over the screen, the sun glaring off the glass. The weight of the moment pressed in from all sides. The crowd watching, the bass thumping off the water, the distant glint of buoys at the mouth of the bay. Before I made that call, a thought flashed through my mind, sharp and bitter. Of course it's her, because this didn't come out of nowhere. You don't wake up one morning and decide to hijack your neighbor's boat in front of half the community. You build up to that level of crazy, layer by layer, violation by violation, until you honestly believe the bay answers to you. The first time I met Bethany Reed, the water was calm and she wasn't holding my wheel. She was holding a clipboard. I'd been at the marina since before the HOA even had a logo. Years back, when the place was just a tired line of wooden docks and a half-rotten bait shack, the original landowner leased out the waterline rights to a handful of us who saw something more than peeling paint. We put in sweat equity, money, time, upgraded power posts, replaced pilings, brought in a proper fuel line. I signed a long-term lease on a run of slips and a strip of waterline that, on paper and in practice, was outside any future HOA's reach. Fast forward a decade and a developer with big teeth built Sunset Marina estates around that same bay. Pastel houses, palm trees stuck into imported soil, a stone sign with backlit letters. They slapped a homeowners association on top like frosting. We were grandfathered in, they told us. The old waterline lease stayed intact. Our slips weren't amenities. They were contracted rights. That was in black and white. Then Bethany moved in. I remember the day because she arrived like a front pushing across a clear sky. I was under Blue Ember's console, wrist deep in wiring, with the smell of hot plastic and salt thick in the air. I heard heels on the dock, a strange, sharp sound among the usual thud of boat shoes and flip-flops. "Excuse me?" a voice called. I slid out and squinted up. She was standing there on the pier like she expected a red carpet. Floral blouse, pink cardigan draped over her shoulders despite the heat. Clipboard held like a scepter. Blonde hair pulled tight, not a strand out of place. "Can I help you?" I asked, pushing myself to my feet. Her eyes flicked over the boat, over the teak, over the stainless, over me in my old Coast Guard PT shirt and work shorts. I watched her categorize things in real time: assets, eyesores, obstacles. "You must be Mr. Cole," she said. "I'm Bethany Reed, the new president of the Sunset Marina Estates Homeowners Association." "Remy's fine," I said. "And congratulations, I guess." She smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. "We're doing a comprehensive review of community assets, just making sure everything is documented correctly. The marina is such a valuable amenity." Amenity? I glanced around at the weathered planks and coiled lines. "This dock line isn't HOA property, Ms. Reed. It's under a separate waterline lease. Been that way for years." She lowered her clipboard slightly. "I'm aware of the lease language," she said, in the careful tone of someone who'd skimmed it once and decided it was negotiable. "But from a practical standpoint, residents see the bay as part of their community lifestyle. We need to ensure fair access." "Fair access," I repeated. "To the water," she clarified. "To boating. To shoreline experiences." I wiped my hands on a rag. Anybody can buy a boat, pay for a slip, and get out there. Same as I did. This slip is in my lease. This vessel is registered to me. That's as fair as it gets. Something flickered in her expression, just for a second. Irritation, quickly sealed over with a brittle smile. "We'll circle back to that," she said, tapping the clipboard. "In the meantime, the board will be sending out updated guidelines about parking, noise, and visual harmony at the marina. We're all about keeping values high." She turned on her heel and walked back up the pier. Her perfume, something sharp and floral, hung in the humid air long after she was gone. The first letter came a week later. "Dear resident," it began, as if she couldn't bring herself to use my name. "In order to preserve the community's waterfront aesthetic, all vessels visible from shared walkways must maintain a neat, uncluttered appearance. No tarps, no visible tools, no excessive maintenance activity during peak viewing hours." Jake pinned his copy to the bulletin board in the marina office and wrote in red marker, "Define excessive." I could have laughed it off. I almost did. But the letters kept coming. We got a notice about unauthorized signage because someone had taped a handwritten "for sale" sign to a piling. Then it was restricted hours for pressure washing. Then a proposal to limit deck lights after 9 p.m. so nobody's fairy lights hurt the resale value of a 3-story stucco box up the hill. Most of it was petty, overreaching, the kind of nonsense HOAs are famous for. Annoying, but not exactly the stuff federal cases are made of. Then she went after the slips. One evening, the sky heavy with late summer haze, I found a glossy trifold brochure stuffed into my marina mailbox. On the front, a photo of the bay filtered so hard the water looked like bottled turquoise. Across the top, in looping script, Sunset Marina Shared Waterfront Initiative. I opened it. Inside were renderings of happy residents in linen shirts, kids with life jackets too clean to be real, and a single line that made my jaw tighten. "We're excited to explore a new era where boating and water access are shared benefits of HOA membership, not restricted privileges." Restricted privileges. That was one way to describe private property. Jake found me sitting on the tailgate of my truck. the brochure open in my hands, the evening wind kicking grit across the asphalt. "Let me guess," he said. "You got the 'We take your stuff, call it community' pamphlet too." "Looks that way," I said. He leaned against the bumper. "You going to the meeting?" There was an HOA meeting that Thursday, Bethany's town hall, to discuss the initiative. I hadn't planned on it. I saw enough heated rooms in my line of work. But when someone tries to redraw the line between what's theirs and what's yours, you either show up or you get rolled over. "I'll be there," I said. The clubhouse sat atop a low bluff overlooking the bay, glass front catching the last of the sun. Inside, the AC worked overtime, humming above a crowd of mostly curious, slightly confused residents. People in polos and sundresses, faces pink from sun and wine. Bethany stood at the front beside a big TV showing a slideshow. Palm trees, sunset shots, posed families on rented boats that definitely weren't from our docks. "Water is the heart of Sunset Marina Estates," she said, voice smooth through the microphone. "It's what you all moved here for. But right now, a small number of individuals control the prime water access. That doesn't feel aligned with our community values." I sat in the back with Jake, arms crossed. My stomach did that slow, pissed-off burn it gets when someone starts rewriting reality with a pleasant tone. A man in a fishing visor raised his hand. "You talking about the old slips?" he asked. "Those leases were signed before this place was built." "And we respect that," Bethany said quickly. "But we also have to think creatively. Share dock time, create a schedule, maybe rotate vessels so everyone can enjoy the view." "The view is my boat," a woman near the side wall said. "My husband and I paid for that slip. We pay for maintenance, insurance, fuel." Bethany's smile thinned, then widened again, like she'd slapped a filter over her own face. "Of course," she said. "We aren't taking anything. We're just reclassifying usage as part of the shared waterfront experience." The words sounded sanitized, harmless. But underneath, they carried the same meaning I'd heard in other places, other meetings, when people in nice clothes talked about temporary access on property they didn't own. Take now, ask forgiveness later. Or better yet, change the paperwork so you never have to ask at all. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice level. "My name is Remy Cole," I said. "I'm one of the individuals with an old marina lease, the one your developer signed in exchange for us upgrading this place before your houses were here." A few heads turned. Bethany's eyes met mine. "I've read the lease," I went on. "Those slips and a portion of the water line are excluded from HOA control. Explicitly. You can't reclassify someone else's contract, no matter how creative you get." Murmur ran through the room. Bethany's fingers tightened around the microphone. For a heartbeat, I thought she might drop the friendly act. Then she laughed lightly. "No one is talking about violating contracts," she said. "This is brainstorming, Remy. Community dialogue. Don't you agree it's unfair that most residents never get a chance to touch the water up close?" "Unfair and illegal aren't the same thing," I replied. Her smile never faltered, but the air around us dropped a few degrees. After the meeting, people drifted out in clumps, voices low, papers rustling. I noticed something as I left, a stack of draft bylaw amendments laid out on a side table. On top, there was a sheet labeled Article 9, Waterfront Governance. I picked it up. One clause was highlighted in yellow. The HOA recognizes shared sovereignty over all waterfront and water-dependent amenities within visual range of common property. Shared sovereignty. It was a clever phrase, the kind that sounded official enough to slip past a tired eye. It didn't negate my lease in itself, but it planted a seed, a foothold, a future argument that we all agreed the bay was theirs to manage. Jake peered over my shoulder. "She really put that in there?" "Looks like it," I said, jaw tight. "You think anyone's actually going to vote for that?" I watched Bethany across the room, laughing with a cluster of board members near the windows, the dark line of the bay reflected behind them. Someone like her didn't need unanimous votes. She just needed enough people not paying attention. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Because here's the thing about documents. In my world, on the water and in courtrooms, they're as real as pilings and pilot houses. People can lie, spin stories, wave their hands all they want. But when it comes down to it, what's written and signed is what stands. Bethany had just put something in writing that she had no right to claim. Standing there under the hum of fluorescent lights, smelling coffee gone burnt, and the faint tang of salt drifting in from the open balcony doors, I had a thought I didn't like. What happens when someone that determined, that entitled, that sure she speaks for everyone, finally decides no one can stop her? I got my answer the morning she took Blue Ember. Sunlight hammered the marina, turning the planks into glowing strips of gold. A heat haze shimmered off the water, bending the horizon line where the turquoise bay met the sky. The breeze carried a mix of sea salt, sunscreen, and distant diesel, summer's fingerprint on the coast. And over all of it, pounding like a misplaced nightclub, came the unmistakable bass from my own sound system. Blue Ember wasn't built for chaos. She was built for long, quiet runs at sunrise, the kind where the only sound is the hum of the engine and the soft slap of water under the bow. That morning, she looked like a circus act gone rogue. The boat surged through the marina mouth, bow rising too high before slamming back down with a smack that made a couple of pelicans scatter. The teak deck flashed in the sun as three women danced barefoot, plastic cups spinning out of their hands and bouncing off the gunnel into the bay. Streamers fluttered from my rails, pink, glittery, the kind you'd find in a dollar party aisle. At the helm stood Bethany Reed, HOA Tiara of Sunset Marina Estates. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't sneaking. She wasn't even trying to look apologetic. She had one hand gripping my wheel, and the other in the air like she was conducting an orchestra of chaos. "Liberate the marina!" she shouted, voice slicing cleanly across the water. "No more selfish boat hoarders!" A few of the women screeched in support, nearly toppling over as Blue Ember veered hard to port. The hull groaned as she carved a turn too tight for her size. A fisherman in a small skiff threw both arms up in alarm, bracing himself as Bethany's wake hit him broadside. He spun out, his hat flying into the water. On the pier, the crowd gasped as one. I felt something inside me harden. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something that came from years of pulling people off sandbars, wrecks, and overturned hulls. Something that knew exactly how fast a joyride becomes a rescue call. "She's going to hit something," Jake muttered beside me. He had his iced coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, filming steadily like the marina's own wildlife documentarian. Or someone. "Look at her line," I said quietly. Bethany was steering like the boat operated on wishes, not physics. She jerked the wheel with every shift of her mood, sending Blue Ember weaving between anchored vessels. The engine revved high, then low, then high again. My poor throttle being abused by someone who thought horsepower was a mood. Jake whistled. "Man, she's treating your boat like it's a bumper car." Another swing, another burst of laughter from on board. The bass rattled across the water. A kayak dead ahead tried to paddle out of her path. Bethany didn't slow down, didn't adjust, didn't even notice. The kayak rolled hard as Blue Ember's wake tore past it, the man inside gripping the edges to stay upright. I felt that cold shift inside me again, sliding deeper. "This is more than HOA nonsense," Jake said. "Yeah," I murmured. "It is." Blue Ember cleared the last set of anchored boats and shot straight toward the marked channel. The buoys gleamed bright white in the sun, their reflective strips catching the light like small lighthouses. Beyond them was the open corridor of federal navigable waters, where the Coast Guard's rules governed every wake, every vessel, every reckless decision. Bethany had no awareness of the line she was crossing. Or maybe she did, and assumed the rules bent for her. The women behind her danced, shouted, waved at the crowd on the pier. One held her phone aloft, live streaming the entire stunt for her followers. I could practically hear the caption, HOA President takes back the bay. I took a breath, long and steady. My jaw flexed once, twice. Then Bethany turned Blue Ember around again, too fast, too wide, and the starboard rail nearly dipped below the surface. The boat righted herself only because gravity had mercy. The women squealed, thrilled, and terrified in the same breath. Jake swore, "Remy, she's gonna flip your boat." But that wasn't the worst of it. As Blue Ember sprinted toward the channel, Bethany turned the wheel again and shouted something triumphant. The music dipped for half a second, and the sound that filled the silence was unmistakable, my engine straining beyond what I had ever asked of it. My grip tightened. She was running my boat like she bought it, like she built it, like the water owed her safe passage. I took one step toward the edge of the pier, the boards warm under my boots. The sunlight glared off the white hull, off the stainless fittings, off the spray shooting from the bow. I could feel every vibration of the engine in my bones. I knew that machine better than my own truck. I knew how she handled, how she cornered, how she coasted. And I knew without a shred of doubt that Bethany Reed had no idea what she was doing. This wasn't entitlement anymore. This was danger. Jake looked at me sideways. "What now? You going to shout her down? Swim out there?" "I mean, I'll film it, but—" "No," I said, because shouting did nothing with her. Talking did nothing. Warnings, rules, neighborly reminders, they all slid off her like rain off waxed fiberglass. This was federal water. This was a stolen vessel. This was reckless operation. There was only one correct response. Still watching Blue Ember bounce across the sunlit bay, I reached for my radio. Not my phone, not a casual call, but the clipped, efficient tool of my real job. Jake's eyebrows shot up. "You're calling the Coast Guard?" I pressed the transmit button. "She crossed the line," I said quietly. "And out there, the rules aren't hers." A soft click sounded in my ear, followed by the steady hum of an open channel. The familiar rhythm of background static slid over me like an old coat, comforting, grounding, reminding me who I was beyond dock lines, HOA newsletters, and polite neighborly restraint. "Sector Gulfview, this is Commander Cole," I said, voice even. "I need to report an unauthorized vessel in motion inside the approach corridor." There was a pause, then a crisp reply. "Commander Cole, go ahead." My eyes stayed on Blue Ember as she tore another sloppy arc across the water. Sunlight glinted off her stainless rails, and each hard turn sent spray flying in bright, sparkling sheets. The women aboard shrieked with laughter, high, careless, ignorant of how close they were to becoming headlines. "Vessel name is Blue Ember," I said. "Private registration. Currently occupied without permission by an HOA board member and several passengers. Behavior is erratic. Wake violations inside the marina, near collision with smaller craft." The dispatcher typed quickly. I could hear the keystrokes through the open channel. "Copy that. Do you have visual, Commander?" "Affirmative," I said. "I'm on the main pier. They're approaching the federal no-wake zone." Jake exhaled beside me long and low. "Man, you just lit the fuse." I didn't answer. I watched. Blue Ember, my boat, my hours of repair work, my careful tuning, hit the edge of the marked corridor and plowed right through as if the buoys were decorations. The white markers rocked violently in her wake. The dispatcher's voice hardened. "Commander, confirming. Vessel has entered federal managed water." "Correct." "Understood. Coast Guard assets are responding. Another voice cut in, deeper, more authoritative. Commander Cole, this is Patrol Boat 472. We're 3 minutes out. Maintain visual and stand by. I lowered the radio slightly, feeling the cold edge inside me sharpen. This wasn't me as a neighbor. Not me as a tired homeowner dealing with HOA theatrics. This was me in uniform, even if I wasn't wearing it. This was duty. Jake nudged my elbow. She's about to learn today. Out on the water, Bethany struck a pose at the helm, balancing herself with a swagger that had no business being on a moving boat. She shouted something at the women behind her, and a fresh burst of laughter rose like gulls startled into the air. A man on the pier muttered, "Somebody's gonna get hurt." "Not if the Coast Guard gets there first," I said. The conversation around us grew into a low buzz. People stepped closer to the edge of the pier, shielding their eyes against the glare, watching blue ember like they were watching a runaway horse. Phones lifted. More recording. Jake glanced around. Half the neighborhood's getting this on camera. HOA's gonna have a field day trying to spin this. They won't be the ones writing the report, I said. The water beyond the channel brightened suddenly, catching on the running lights of a fast-approaching vessel. A sleek white patrol boat shot around the bend, its hull cutting a perfect, disciplined line across the bay. Sunlight flashed off the cabin glass. The engine's growl carried across the water like thunder traveling fast. Jake let out a low whistle. There they are. People on the pier stirred as the patrol boat closed in on Blue Ember. The blue strobes lit up even in the full blaze of morning sun, casting flashes across the surface like shards of sapphire. Bethany didn't see them at first. She was too busy performing for her live stream, spinning the wheel with theatrical flair, tossing her hair, pointing at the water like she was giving a guided tour. Her friends clapped to the music. One held a champagne bottle like a trophy. Then, over the music, over the laughter, over the pounding bass, a voice boomed across the bay. "Vessel Blue Ember, this is the United States Coast Guard. Reduce speed and prepare to be boarded." The women froze mid-dance. The music kept playing, but the tone of the scene shifted, like someone had pulled the brightness out of the sky. Bethany blinked, looking around, confused. Then she spotted the patrol boat closing in, its bow carving a determined path straight toward her. She leaned toward her friends, squinting. "Is that for us?" Jake choked. Oh, she did not just say that. The loud hailer boomed again, more forcefully. "Vessel Blue Ember, reduce speed immediately." People on the pier gasped. Someone whispered, "She's in trouble." A child tugged his father's shirt and asked why the police boat was yelling. Bethany's expression flickered, confidence stuttering under the weight of reality. She gripped the wheel more tightly and called out toward the pier. "It's fine, this is a private HOA outing." Jake slapped his forehead. "Lady, you're doubling down on federal water?" I raised the radio again. "Patrol Boat 472, visual condition unchanged. Operator is ignoring commands." "Copy, Commander. Preparing to intercept." Blue Ember surged forward, Bethany panicking and pushing the throttle too far. Her bow lifted, carving through a buoy line with a thud that echoed off the marina walls. One of the women screamed and grabbed the rail. "That's it," Jake said. "She just made this official." The patrol boat accelerated, wake rolling clean and powerful behind it. Two officers stood ready at the bow, hands gripping the safety rail, eyes fixed on my boat. Bethany looked over her shoulder and saw them gaining fast. Her face went pale. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw the truth reach her. The rules she'd been rewriting in her head didn't stretch this far, didn't outrank this badge, didn't outrun this boat. I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction, not revenge. Something closer to relief. Because once the Coast Guard took over, the danger would stop. People would stop being at risk. My boat would stop taking damage. And more importantly, the law, not the HOA, would decide what happened next. On the water, the patrol boat drew alongside Blue Ember. An officer lifted the loudhailer once more. "Blue Ember, cut your engine now!" Bethany's hands trembled on the wheel. She hesitated. Too long. Because the moment she didn't obey, the Coast Guard stepped in. The patrol boat surged forward with a controlled burst of throttle, slicing through Blue Ember's wake until the bow rose and settled alongside my vessel in one smooth, well-practiced maneuver. Two officers moved with synchronized purpose, one preparing the hook line, the other giving hand signals to the coxswain. The entire scene unfolded with the clean precision of a drill I'd seen 1,000 times. Except this time, it was happening to my boat. The loudhailer crackled again. "Blue Ember, kill your engine!" Bethany threw a panicked look at her friends, then toward the pier, then back at the officers. Her mouth opened and closed like she couldn't decide whether to argue or plead. The bay wind whipped at her floral blouse and sun hat, turning both into frantic little flags of her unraveling confidence. Finally, far too late, she reached for the ignition. Her hand slipped. Blue Ember lurched. The engine roared instead of dying. That was enough. With swift, practiced movements, two Coast Guard officers stepped onto my stern deck, boots thudding against the teak I'd sanded by hand. One reached the console and snapped the throttle to neutral. The other twisted the key, and the engine coughed once, twice, and fell silent. The music kept going, bass still thumping, but the sudden quiet of the engine was louder than any alarm. Bethany stumbled back from the console, nearly tripping over her own cardigan. "You can't just board," she shrieked. "This is a private vessel. This is a private event. You have no right." "Ma'am," the lead officer said, with the kind of calm that signals the end of debate. "You are operating a vessel recklessly, inside a restricted channel, and without authorization." The women behind her huddled together, their earlier excitement evaporating into nervous whispers. One of them began gathering the strewn plastic cups as if tidying might somehow shrink the consequences. From the pier, dozens of residents watched with hands shading their eyes, murmuring. Phones rose higher. People leaned over the rails. A kid on someone's shoulders stared wide-eyed, as if watching a movie come to life. The officers guided Bethany toward the transom. She didn't resist, but she didn't exactly cooperate either. She walked stiffly, like each step was an affront. Her sun hat hung crooked over one ear. Blue Ember drifted under the patrol boat's control. The two vessels locked together in a steady glide toward the main pier. The scene felt surreal. The flashing lights reflecting off water, the sudden hush of the crowd, the heavy brightness of the late morning sun. When they reached the pier, the officers helped the passengers disembark. The women stepped shakily onto the planks, clutching their bags like lifelines. A couple of residents gently guided them aside. They avoided my gaze. Then came Bethany. Two officers held her lightly by the arms, not forceful, but firm enough to let everyone know the situation was no longer hers to command. Her sandals clacked awkwardly on the dock as they brought her forward, and there I stood, arms crossed, uniform shirt tucked cleanly, boots solid on the pier. She froze when she saw me. The sun lit everything with brutal honesty, her smeared makeup, her mussed hair, the wild, frantic rise and fall of her chest. Her expression shifted through recognition, embarrassment, then an indignation so brittle it was ready to snap. "Remy?" she croaked, voice catching. You didn't tell me you were—" "A Coast Guard commander," I said evenly. "Didn't come up at the last HOA meeting." One of the nearby officers glanced at me with faint amusement, but kept professional posture. The other tightened his grip slightly on Bethany's elbow, sensing the storm of emotions brewing behind her eyes. The crowd leaned in. Even the gulls seemed quieter, circling above in curious loops. "You can explain this," Bethany said loudly, forcing her voice into something she thought was controlled. Tell them this is just a misunderstanding. Tell them I wasn't stealing anything. You took my vessel, I said, without permission. You entered federal water. You ignored multiple commands. You endangered people. Her jaw dropped. It wasn't stealing. I was taking the community out, and you know the HOA supports shared usage. Behind us, Jake snorted so hard he nearly spilled his iced coffee. Bethany whipped her head toward him. This has nothing to do with you. Jake raised his phone like a badge. It's already trending. She paled. The officers guided her a step closer, bringing her directly in front of me. Her breath hitched, a tiny sound, sharp as a pebble hitting metal. She looked down at Blue Ember rocking gently against the pier. Its hull scraped, one rail slightly bent. You're pressing charges? She whispered, voice trembling. That's not what I'm deciding right now, I said. Her eyes widened with hope. That's what they are deciding. The lead officer stepped forward. Commander Cole, as the vessel's registered owner and reporting party, we need your statement. But first, do you wish to accompany us for formal processing? Every eye on the pier shifted from him to me. In that moment, under a sun as unforgiving as truth, I saw exactly how this would play out. Not as a neighborly squabble, not as HOA drama, but as a matter of law. Bethany swallowed hard. Remy, please, you can fix this. But the thing about the water, about federal jurisdiction, is that once a line is crossed, no HOA rule, no cardigan, no loud voice can rewrite it. I let the silence hang between us, heavy and bright. Then I answered. Officers, I said, my voice steady in the hot, shimmering air. I'll provide a full statement, and I'll accompany you. A ripple moved through the crowd, not loud, but unmistakable. A few whispers, a few sharp inhales, the subtle shift of people realizing something bigger than HOA drama had just locked into place. Bethany's face crumpled for a split second, panic cracking through her practiced composure. It was the look of someone who had run full speed into a wall she never believed existed. No, she stammered, shaking her head so violently her sun hat nearly fell off. No, Remy, you don't have to go with them. You can tell them it's all a misunderstanding. Her voice rose higher, shrinking into desperation. You can fix this. I am fixing it, I said softly. Those words hit her harder than any formal charge. The officers guided her toward the patrol boat, their movements firm but respectful. She looked over her shoulder at the crowd, the people she'd lectured about fence heights, flower colors, deck lighting, now staring at her with a mix of shock and vindication. When her sandals hit the patrol boat's deck, something in the marina shifted. The tension that had stretched across the pier like a taut rope finally snapped. It didn't snap with noise. It snapped with quiet. A deep, settling quiet that washed over the water and the wooden planks and the people gathered like witnesses at a turning point. Blue Ember floated beside the pier, no longer thrashing in wild arcs, just rocking gently with the small waves. Without the blaring engine and music, I could hear the soft creak of the dock lines, the faint slap of water against the hull, the hum of summer insects somewhere inland. Jake stepped closer, lowering his phone. She really did it, he murmured. She really tried to turn your boat into a parade float. I exhaled. Not a sigh. More like my body remembering how to breathe after holding something tight inside for too long. Yeah, I said. She did. My eyes went to the damage. New scrapes along the rail, scuffs on the hull, a faint buckle in the starboard stanchion. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make my stomach tighten. That boat wasn't just fiberglass and fittings. She was years of work, sweat, late nights in the shed tuning the engine, early mornings polishing chrome. She was my escape from noise, not the center of someone else's chaos. You want me to pull her into slip 7 so we can assess the damage? Jake offered. Not yet, I said. Coast Guard needs full documentation first. We stood there for a long moment, watching the patrol boat skim away from the pier, taking Bethany Reed, with her smudged mascara, twisted cardigan, and undone power, toward the federal dock down the channel. As the distance grew, so did the sense of quiet. Not peace, not yet. Just quiet. Around us, the crowd began to break apart. Conversations started in hushed tones. Someone muttered, "She finally pushed too far." Another shook their head and said they'd seen this coming for months. A couple on the far end of the pier crossed themselves as if blessing the bay for having survived her. When most of the residents drifted off, I stepped onto Blue Ember's deck. The planks were warm under my boots, still holding the heat from the morning sun. Plastic cups rolled lazily toward the scuppers as the boat rocked. Glitter from the gaudy streamers clung to the teak, catching the light like scattered shards. I ran my hand along the rail. A deep scuff roughened the smooth stainless. My jaw tensed. The engine hatch bore fresh scratches from someone standing on it while dancing. The throttle lever felt slightly off-center, jerked too hard one too many times. Beside me, Jake let out a low whistle. Man, she treated this thing like a rental. It's still afloat, I said. That's something. He snorted. Your standards are too generous. I crouched at the stern, running my fingers over the damage with a practiced touch. My brain cataloged each issue, the cost, the repairs, the lost time. But underneath that practical layer was a deeper ache. Boats are personal. The water remembers who respects it. Every gouge felt like a small betrayal. After a while, Jake leaned against the railing. So, what now? Now we wait for the officers to finish intake, I said. Then they'll want a statement from me. Photos, diagnostics. And Bethany? He asked. I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, I didn't know. This wasn't like an HOA meeting where someone throws a tantrum and storms out. This wasn't a neighborly dispute about lawn decor. This was federal jurisdiction, maritime law, vessel operation, safety violations. The water doesn't care about titles or committees or politics. It only cares about consequences. Finally, I said, they'll process her, file the initial charges, then the legal wheels start turning. Jake nodded slowly. She's not going to take this quietly. No, I said. She won't. And I knew deep in my bones that the storm she would try to unleash afterward might be louder than anything we'd seen yet. The morning sun rose higher, turning the surface of the bay into molten silver. A light breeze carried the scent of salt and diesel across the pier. I heard the soft creak of wood as Blue Ember settled against her fenders. Somewhere behind me a gull called out. The marina was calm again. Not peaceful, but calm, like the eye of a storm that hadn't finished spinning. Jake cleared his throat. You see the shoreline group chat? No. He held up his phone, scrolling. Video's already circulating. I didn't need to look. I knew exactly what footage had gone out. Bethany at the helm, shrieking with champagne in hand. The Coast Guard intercept. The moment she froze when she saw me. I'll deal with that later, I said quietly. But even as I said it, I knew I wouldn't be able to ignore what came next. Because shame is one thing. Public humiliation within a tightly wound HOA? That's pressure like a vice. And people like Bethany Reed don't break quietly. As a patrol boat disappeared toward the horizon, the sun painting ripples gold behind it, I stood in the center of the quiet marina and felt the shift in the air. The storm wasn't over. It had just changed shape. By late afternoon, the marina returned to its usual rhythm. Diesel smells, gulls crying, the soft groan of docks flexing with the tide. But under that familiar soundtrack was a current of gossip, carrying Bethany's name like driftwood. Somewhere across the water, a mechanical sander buzzed. Someone was fixing a deckboard. A soft wind stirred the palms. The world tried to move on. But I knew better. People like Bethany don't disappear after being escorted off a boat. They rally. They rewrite the story. They claw at any narrative thread they can twist in their favor. It didn't take long for the backlash to begin. Around sunset, my phone buzzed with a message from the Coast Guard station. Commander Cole, suspect making statements. Request clarification. I stood beside Blue Ember, running my hand along the bent railing when the notification appeared. The water glowed orange beneath the pier, and shadows stretched long behind the pilings. Jake wandered over with a half-finished iced coffee. You heard yet? I showed him the message. He barked a soft laugh. Oh boy, she's starting early. We walked toward my truck as the last streaks of pink faded out of the sky. Gravel crunched under our boots. The heat of the day finally loosened, drifting away in warm waves. By the time I reached the Coast Guard station, a modest building painted sun-bleached white, the cicadas were in full chorus. Inside, the cool air and faint scent of disinfectant hit me immediately. Officer Riley, a sharp, composed woman with neatly tied hair and a posture that could quiet a room, waved me into her office. Commander, thank you for coming, she said. We have some statements to review. She opened a folder. The first page made Jake nearly choke on the last of his iced coffee. Bethany had written, in looping cursive like a school principal scolding a child, that I was invited aboard Blue Ember by Mr. Cole for community outreach purposes. He verbally stated he wanted to support HOA water programs. He sabotaged his own vessel to frame me because he opposes HOA reform. He previously promised the boat as a shared amenity. Jake slapped his knee. Oh, come on. She wrote this with a straight face? Riley did not smile. It gets stranger. She slid another page forward. A printed excerpt from the HOA bylaws, highlighted, circled, annotated with furious pen strokes. She claims, Riley continued, that as president of the HOA, she holds responsible jurisdiction over all waterfront activity visible from the community. She tapped the highlight. Whatever she means by that. I let out a careful breath. Visible from the community? That could mean half the Gulf. Exactly, Riley said. Jake leaned back, whistling. She's building a fantasy country out of bylaws. Then came the kicker. A final page, typed, formal, stamped by the HOA secretary, probably under duress. She asserts you had a long-standing agreement to let residents use your slip, Riley said, and that she, acting as HOA president, was initiating a community boating day. My jaw tightened. None of that is real. Riley nodded. We suspected as much, but we needed your confirmation. A quiet settled between us, a thick one, the kind that comes right before someone delivers the twist. Riley folded her hands. Here's the issue, Commander. Her statements, while untrue, introduce liability concerns for the HOA. She glanced down at the papers again. She's made claims of authority the HOA legally does not possess. Jake raised his eyebrows. Meaning, Riley said, the HOA may now be financially responsible for damages incurred under what she labeled an HOA event. The air shifted inside that small office. That was the twist, the pivot I didn't see coming. My boat was damaged, a federal buoy was damaged, a kayaker had nearly been capsized, and now, thanks to her wild claims, the HOA might be dragged into the legal mess right alongside her. Bethany might have torpedoed her own board, Jake said, letting out a low whistle. Riley nodded. Precisely. I pressed my fingertips against the folder, grounding myself. This wasn't the storm I'd expected. She wasn't stopping at excuses. She was trying to rewrite reality, using letters, bylaws, and fabricated intent. And in doing so, she had opened the HOA to federal scrutiny. I closed the folder. "What do you need from me?" "Your formal statement," Riley said. "Then be prepared. She may attempt to escalate this into an administrative hearing with her HOA. If she does, you're likely to be subpoenaed." Jake groaned. "She's gonna drag this whole circus back into the clubhouse." "She might," Riley agreed. "And that means she's not done with you yet." As we stepped out into the night, warm air rolling off the water, Jake stretched and cracked his neck. "You know what this means, right?" he said. "That she's doubling down?" I asked. "That she's doubling down, blindfolded, in a hailstorm," he corrected. "And she thinks the HOA is an umbrella." I unlocked my truck and paused before climbing in. The marina lights glittered along the bay, casting long ripples across the dark water. For the first time since the incident, a thin exhaustion pressed against my shoulders. Not physical, but the weariness of knowing the next phase wouldn't be loud or reckless. It would be strategic. Paperwork, claims, bylaws, twists of language sharp enough to cut. Bethany Reed was no longer fighting the Coast Guard. She was fighting me, with pens, letters, accusations, and the full force of her inventive imagination. And as tired as I was, I could feel another shift in the air. Something colder, something calculated. If she couldn't win on the water, she'd try to win on paper. The next morning broke gray and heavy, a thin layer of marine fog stretching across the bay like gauze. The marina, usually bright and lively at sunrise, looked muted, boats rising and falling in slow breaths, rigging clinking softly in the still air. The smell of wet wood and diesel hung close to the planks. It was the kind of morning that made the world feel paused. Perfect timing, I thought grimly, because the fight ahead wasn't loud. It was quiet, technical, legal. And for the first time in this whole saga, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tired. I was focused. Bethany's accusations were no longer just words. They were claims with legal implications. Statements that could tangle property rights, water access laws, and federal regulations into one messy knot. And if there was one thing I knew how to handle, it was knots. I parked outside the marina office, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and headed down the dock. Blue Ember sat empty in her slip, her hull still bearing scars from Bethany's Joyride. I paused beside her, running my hand along the cool fiberglass. "You'll get fixed," I murmured, "but we need to prove everything first." Boots sounded behind me. "Morning." I turned to see Sarah Mitchell, maritime lawyer, old friend, and one of the sharpest legal minds on this side of the Gulf, walking toward me. Her hair was pulled back, her blazer crisp, and a leather folder tucked under her arm. Even through the fog, she moved with that same steady confidence I remembered from her days clerking on the State Water Commission. "Sarah," I greeted, "thanks for coming." "You said it was urgent," she replied, stepping onto the dock. "And when a Coast Guard commander says urgent, I don't wait." We shared a brief smile, the kind old friends exchange before stepping into serious business. Jake appeared from behind a piling, sipping a fresh iced coffee like he'd been hiding there on standby. "I figured you two might need me," he said. "Also, I brought photos. Lots of photos." Sarah smiled. "Always prepared, aren't you?" "It's my charm," Jake replied. We headed into the small marina office, its walls lined with charts, tide tables, an old brass clock ticking faintly. The air carried the scent of salt, copier toner, and yesterday's coffee. I laid everything out on the table: the waterline deed, the slip lease from the original landowner, my registration papers, photos of the damage, GPS logs from Blue Ember's onboard system, and video clips residents had already forwarded. Sarah flipped through each document slowly, methodically. She didn't rush. Lawyers like her never do. They absorb every detail like they're reading a map before navigating rough seas. She stopped when she reached Bethany's handwritten complaint. "Wow," she murmured. "She really leaned into fiction." "She believes it," Jake said. "That's the scary part." Sarah tapped her pen on the page. "Here. Look at this phrasing. Shared sovereignty. That's an overreach even for a power-hungry HOA president." "She tried to slip it into the bylaws," I said. "Used flowery language, hoping no one would notice." Sarah nodded slowly. "This actually helps you." "How?" Jake asked, leaning forward. "Her claim suggests the HOA thinks it controls the bay," Sarah said. "But it doesn't. The HOA has no authority over navigable waters. Even implying it does could expose them to liability, especially since her actions caused damages during an activity she labeled an HOA event." I watched the gears turning behind her eyes. She wasn't just reading. She was building a case. "What about the buoy?" I asked. "It took a hard hit." "That's federal property," Mostreta replied. "Damaging it carries significant penalties. And since she claimed she was operating under HOA authority, that throws the HOA into the liability chain." Jake let out a low whistle. "This is going to explode in that clubhouse." "Oh, it will," Sarah said. "But before it does, we need to document everything properly." She opened her folder and laid out a printed map, one I recognized immediately. Coast Guard jurisdictional zones, shaded areas, navigation channels, regulated markers. She placed her finger over the marina entrance. "This is where she crossed the federal boundary?" "Exactly," I said. "And the kayak?" she asked. "Almost capsized," Jake said. "I've got footage." "And the skiff?" "The wake hit him hard," I said. "He's willing to give a statement." Sarah scribbled notes. "Good. We'll need him." For a moment, the fog outside thickened, dimming the room. The clock ticked louder. A distant gull called through the mist. Sarah closed the folder, looked at me directly, and said, "This is more than an HOA dispute now. This is a legal quagmire she walked straight into with both arms outstretched." "Can we shut her down permanently?" Jake asked. Sarah considered her words. "If we handle this correctly, yes. Between the lease, the federal jurisdiction, the witness accounts, and the damage documentation, she doesn't stand on solid ground anywhere." I took a slow breath. Relief wasn't the right word. It was something steadier, something that settled in deep. The feeling of a man who'd been pushed far enough and was finally seeing the path to resolution open ahead. "What's the next step?" I asked. "We wait for the Coast Guard's incident report," she said. "Then we prepare for the HOA meeting. She'll try to use it to spin her narrative. That's where we'll shut the door." Jake grinned. "You want me to film that meeting?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Only if you want to become a witness again." Jake didn't hesitate. "That's my specialty." We stepped outside just as the fog began lifting, the sun breaking through in soft beams that shimmered along the bay. Boats emerged slowly from the haze, white hulls, bright rails, lines swaying gently. The world looked clearer, sharper, like the beginning of a turning tide. I let the warm air fill my lungs. "Is this enough to shut her down permanently?" I asked quietly, repeating the thought that had kept bouncing in my mind since yesterday. Sarah glanced at the folder tucked under her arm, then at the water, then at me. "It's more than enough," she said. "Now we just need to let her walk herself right into the rest of it." And she did. 3 days later, the HOA sent out a frantic emergency meeting notice, bold red letters across the email header, claiming critical community concerns and necessary board clarification regarding recent events. That was Bethany's wording. You could smell her perfume in every sentence. The meeting would be held at the glass-walled clubhouse overlooking the bay, the stage for her downfall. By the time I arrived that evening, a thick humidity clung to the air, the kind that blurred the horizon and made the world feel heavy. The clubhouse lights glowed like lanterns against the coming dusk. Residents streamed in, their voices low but urgent, like a building storm of questions. Inside, the room buzzed with whispers, chairs scraping, papers shuffling, the occasional gasp as someone replayed a snippet of the viral video on their phone. It spread through the community like wildfire. There was no containing it. The board sat at the front table, stiff, pale, and visibly uncomfortable. Bethany sat in the center seat, her pink cardigan folded neatly over her shoulders, a posture so rigid it looked painful. Her sun hat was gone, but the tension around her eyes stayed. She cleared her throat and tapped the mic. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice bright and brittle. "I know there has been confusion." Someone in the back coughed. "Confusion?" Another. "You stole a boat." Sarah leaned toward me and whispered, "Tide's already turning." Bethany continued, ignoring the murmurs. "I want to reassure everyone that the HOA has acted in good faith at all times. The so-called incident on the water has been greatly exaggerated online." A hand shot up. Not one of the meek new residents she could bulldoze with HOA jargon. It was Marcus Hale, fisherman, longtime homeowner, and one of the most even-keeled men I'd ever known. "You almost ran me over," Marcus said bluntly. "I had to jump to keep from tipping." Bethany stiffened. "Marcus, that's dramatic. You were—" "I was in my kayak," he cut in. "You made a wake big enough to swamp the stern of a 20-footer. The room rippled with outrage. Before Bethany could recover, another voice rose. "What about the federal buoy she damaged? That's public property." "And the video," someone else called. "We all saw you ignore the Coast Guard." The board members looked ready to melt into their chairs. Bethany forced a tight smile. "Let's maintain order." At that moment, Sarah stepped forward. "Actually," Sarah said, voice calm, "we're here to maintain accuracy." The entire room shifted toward her like gravity had changed direction. "Good evening," she continued. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a maritime attorney. Mr. Cole asked me to attend and provide clarity, since much of this situation involves federal regulations and property rights, subjects the HOA cannot unilaterally redefine." Bethany's head jerked toward her. "We didn't need legal counsel." "With respect," Sarah said gently, "given your recent statements, you very much do." Then Sarah placed her folder on the table with a soft thud that echoed louder than any gavel. Inside were documents, neatly organized, clean copy evidence of everything Bethany had denied, twisted, or fabricated. She began methodically. Item 1. The marina's waterline lease. A page slid forward. Legally binding, pre-HOA, excluded from your jurisdiction. Murmurs rose. Item 2. GPS logs of Blue Ember showing reckless operation inside a restricted channel. Item 3. 3 witness statements describing near collisions. Item 4. Coast Guard's preliminary incident report. Item 5. She paused, the smallest hint of a smile at the edge of her mouth. The federal liability notice for damage to navigation buoy 14B. Gasps erupted. Bethany clutched the table. That's not an HOA matter." "Actually," Sarah said, "it became one when you claimed your actions were conducted under HOA authority." A stunned silence fell, heavy and absolute. Even the air conditioning hum seemed to fade. Then the board president, an older man named Duncan, who had been sweating through his collar for the entire meeting, spoke up with a cracked voice. "Mrs. Reed, did you authorize this event on behalf of the HOA?" Bethany's eyes widened. "No, I mean yes. Not technically. But Remy, he said—" All eyes swung to me. It was my turn. I stood slowly, letting the silence build. Outside the glass wall behind us, the bay shimmered under the last burn of sunset, a calm, steady expanse that didn't care for lies. "I never authorized her to use my boat," I said. "In fact, I explicitly declined her requests multiple times. She was never given permission, not verbally, not in writing, not by implication." I placed my own copy of the lease on the table. And as Sarah stated, the HOA cannot govern federal water. The marina slips under lease or private vessels, not by rule, not by vote, not by wishful thinking. Someone clapped, then someone else, then half the room. Bethany's face twisted. "Stop! This is harassment! You're all twisting my words! I was trying to improve the community!" "By taking a neighbor's boat?" Marcus shot back. "By nearly injuring residents?" Someone else said. "By inventing authority over federal channels?" Another added. Duncan cleared his throat, voice trembling. We need to vote on this." Bethany spun to him. "Vote? Vote on what?" "The motion," Duncan said, "is to remove Mrs. Reed from her position as HOA president effective immediately for misconduct, overreach of authority, and exposure of the HOA to legal liability." A collective breath filled the room. Bethany staggered back like the words had weight. "No," she whispered. "You can't. Built this place. I led this community. But the votes came quickly. Hands lifted. Yes. Yes, yes. All but two. In less than 20 seconds, the woman who had turned the marina into her kingdom was dethroned. But the night wasn't finished. Duncan, still pale, cleared his throat again. "One more item. The marina management contract." He swallowed. "Given the legal circumstances, we will no longer allow the HOA to oversee marina policies. Control will be transferred to Gulf Coast Marine Operations." A wave of shock rippled across the room. I didn't move. "Mr. Cole," Duncan continued slowly, "we understand you consulted with the landowner and the operator. Is that correct?" "Yes," I answered. "And you agree to assist in the transition?" "I do." Somewhere near the back, Jake whispered dramatically, "Ladies and gentlemen, the new sheriff of the water." Bethany's knees buckled into her chair. Just outside the glass windows, the bay stirred with a small evening gust, shivering with silver light. Her kingdom had fallen, not to anger, not to revenge, but to truth written on paper. Consequence had finally arrived. The room slowly emptied after the vote, residents stepping out into the cooling night like people leaving a theater after the final act of a long, exhausting play. No one spoke loudly. No one celebrated openly. But the air carried a quiet, undeniable sense of release. Tension that had tightened this place for months loosened like a rope slackening after too much strain. Sarah gathered her documents, giving me a small nod, the kind that said, "It's done." Jake clapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Well," he murmured, "that's one way to dethrone a monarch." I didn't answer, because even though the gavel had fallen figuratively, my mind wasn't on victory. It was on the water, on blue ember, on what comes after the storm. The next morning dawned softer than the days prior, a pale gold sunrise stretching thin across the bay, calm ripples rolling inward with the lazy rhythm of a place finally catching its breath. From the marina walkway, I saw her, Bethany Reed, wearing an oversized reflective vest, holding a trash picker, not a trace of pink chiffon or floral cardigans in sight. She moved stiffly along the pier under the watchful eye of a marina supervisor, picking up stray bits of litter with the slow resignation of someone who'd never used a tool less prestigious than a clipboard. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who once lectured an elderly man about the proper angle of his patio umbrellas. Now she was wrestling a discarded soda can that kept slipping off her picker. A week ago, I might have felt vindicated watching her struggle. But now, I felt something closer to clarity. I stepped closer. She noticed me and froze, the picker hovering midair. Her eyes darted sideways, like she was deciding whether to flee, fight, or feign indifference. She settled on indignation, her default armor. "This," she said sharply, holding up the picker like a broken scepter, "is humiliating." "Court-ordered service usually is," I replied gently. "You don't have to sound so calm about it," she snapped. "Everyone's staring at me." "They're staring because you almost ran them over last week." She flinched, the picker lowering an inch. For a moment, her face softened. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just tired. The kind of tired that settles deep when the story someone tells themselves finally collapses. I exhaled slowly. "Bethany, you can come back from this, but not if you keep pretending none of it happened." She scoffed. "You think I care about your opinion?" "I think you do," I said. "Otherwise you wouldn't be this defensive." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She stabbed at the soda can again. Missed. Jake appeared from behind a piling. Of course he did, holding his iced coffee like it was part of his standard uniform. He raised it in greeting. "Mornin', sunshine," he said to Bethany. "Go away," she muttered. "No can do. Public pier." A small puff of air escaped her nose. Not a laugh. Closer to an exhausted surrender. Eventually, she got the soda can into her bucket. Barely. When she finally spoke again, her voice lacked its usual pitch. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" she asked quietly. It wasn't a question for Jake. It wasn't even for me, really. It was a question asked by someone who had spent years building a throne from rules, fear, and ceremony, and suddenly realized it was nothing more than driftwood. I answered honestly. "People forgive faster than you think," I said, "but only if you change." She looked down at the picker, her grip tightening. "And if I don't?" "Then this won't be the last time something like this happens," I said. "And next time the consequences might be worse." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening, but tears refused to fall. "I don't want to be a meme anymore," she whispered. "Then don't behave like one," Jake called. She shot him a glare, but it lacked the old heat. She turned away and resumed her slow trek down the pier, the reflective vest bright against the blue morning. I watched her go, feeling neither triumph nor regret. Just closure. Later that afternoon, I walked back to Blue Ember. Her hull gleamed again, fresh repairs, polished rails, the faint smell of new sealant rising off the teak. She looked whole. The marina supervisor passed by. "She's ready for launch anytime you are." "Good," I said. "Feels right to put her back where she belongs." I stepped on deck. The wood felt warm beneath my boots. The bay flickered with sun-dappled light that danced over the bow. The engine hummed with that deep, steady confidence I'd spent years restoring. Out on the open water, the world felt bigger again, quieter, simpler, honest. As I guided Blue Ember past the channel markers, the horizon stretching wide before me, I realized something important. Entitlement doesn't begin with big acts. It starts small. A skipped rule. A belief that consequences are for other people. A conviction that one voice should hold all the power. But the water, the law, truth, they don't bend for anyone. Not even HOA presidents in pink cardigans. When the sun fell into the horizon that evening, scattering gold across the water, I found myself smiling, not at victory, but at clarity. Justice doesn't roar. It settles. quiet as the tide, steady as a returning current, and as blue ember cut across the calm surface, leaving a trail of white foam behind us, I felt the last remnants of the storm drift away. The water was calm again, and so was I. If you've ever had to stand your ground for what's right, drop a justice in the comments so I know I'm not the only one out here fighting these battles. Stories like this remind us that calm truth beats loud entitlement every single time. And if you'd like to hear more real HOA, land rights, and ranch revenge tales, feel free to stick around and subscribe. I'd be glad to have you with me for the next ride.